Okay, welcome everyone. I think we are good to go with this webinar towards equity and justice in marine protected areas. And I want to formally welcome you all. My name is Riku. I'm a senior research scientist at Finnish Environment Institute. I'm a social scientist by background, doing research on various aspects of marine governance. And maybe we just go ahead. Thanks, Francisco. Just a bit of a background on why we are here today. This relates to, from our side, to activities in Blue4All project that is testing conservation tools in various living labs around Europe. And by tools, we mean hands-on instruments used in marine protection, but also methods and techniques to organize and facilitate MPA management. And tool testing for us, it gives insights on the usability of tools. And before this tool testing, we did needs and baseline assessments of MPAs in various living labs. And these tools will be documented and published online next year in a blueprint platform that the project is producing. Next slide, please. Not to mean to bother you too much with the project bureaucracy, but there's a task 2.2 that is dealing with social and governance aspects. And especially we want to bring perspectives on social dimensions and good governance on effective and efficient management of MPAs. And then especially why we think that this is important, that well, obviously the primary role of marine protected areas is nature conservation, but at the same time, biodiversity and nature has high cultural and economic values to people there. But we also have seen that the elements of fairness and equity, they are sometimes quite poorly integrated into conservation practice so far, and this is what we want to strengthen with this project. And then today's webinar, we have 4 presentations. First, Cécile Fattebert will set the scene for us, discuss global principles on equity and justice. And then we have 3 presentations of various tools and approaches to deal with equity and justice. One is that Moses Adjei is presenting application of the SAGE tool, site level assessment of governance and equity. And then Nathan will present the fresh IUCN Guidebook for assessing and improving social equity in marine conservation. It's just recently launched, and it's quite impressive work. And then Aino Rekola, my colleague, will present what we have been doing in Blue4All, a tool for justice assessment and deliberation. Then the next slide, a bit of housekeeping issues. We want you to raise questions and topics to us, and this is done by Q&A function in Teams. It's at least for me, it's under where there is 3 dots and more. You can find there the Q&A, and then you click that, and then there's this small icon opens a menu, and then you select there, ask a question, and then you can ask questions, and then chat is only for very technical issues, but if you want responses from the presenters, it's better to use the Q&A. And well, presenters, you know how much time is given to you. I'm taking the time here, and then please note that we are recording the webinar, and then we will make it available via the Blue4All website and other channels. But then let's go to the presentations. First is Cécile Fattebert from IUCN. IUCN is the International Union for the Conservation of Nature. Cécile joined IUCN in 2020 to work on targeted knowledge exchange between marine conservation practitioners from different regions, but later she has worked in effective area-based conservation program to link marine conservation practitioners to IUCN's Green List standard, and she's also working in diverse and equitable conservation program, focusing among other things on the capacity building functions there. Before joining IUCN, she has worked in marine conservation related positions and projects in Madagascar, Bosnia-Herzegovina, Vietnam, and Philippines. She holds a master's degree in anthropology and sociology. So Cécile, please give us the broader picture on equity and justice.
Thank you, Riku. Hi, everybody, and thank you for being here. So today I will present an overview of our program, Diverse and Equitable Conservation, which is about the governance of protected and conserved areas. So what's the context of protected and conserved areas? Next. So we refer to area-based conservation in general, which is made of a diversity of areas that are governed in different ways. We have protected areas that are most led by governmental agencies like national parks with a priority goal to conserve biodiversity. And we have conserved areas, which are all the other areas which are conserving biodiversity, even though it is not their priority goals. So this is where we find indigenous and traditional territories, or we can also identify other effective area-based conservation measures, locally marine managed areas, etc. So together, they all contribute to what we call a national or even regional system of protected and conserved areas. They often overlap and are intertwined in a complex way. Next. So protected and conserved areas are great measures to conserve biodiversity on the planet, if not the best, if they are effectively managed, but also equitable in the way that they are governed. So they can either recognize the roles of indigenous people and local communities and support their efforts to conserving their land, but they can also be a threat of human rights, for human rights. Like, for example, when you have eviction of local communities because there is establishment of protected areas. So the current Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework of the Convention on Biodiversity, including this target 3 or 30 by 30, is an opportunity to make things right. Next. So when working on protected and conserved areas, there are 3 dimensions. Next. The first is management effectiveness, which can demonstrate that there is positive conservation outcomes for nature and people. The second is about the governance equity of these protected and conserved areas. And the third is the larger network of protected and conserved areas, the way they are embedded and interact with their wider context, like landscape or seascapes. So today I'll focus only on the second dimension. Next. So this is target 3, 30 by 30, with which you're probably familiar. As you can see in a glance, the quantitative element is appears only in the first sentence. All the rest of the target description focuses on equitable governance and human rights approaches to conservation. And these deliberate decisions that were made in 2022 to center human rights and the rights of indigenous peoples and local communities was groundbreaking. And the reference to these aspects of conservation are in fact mentioned in several of the GBF targets. Next. So diverse and equitable conservation within IUCN Protected and Conserved Areas team is a whole program of work. So equitable conservation is not only about justice, but it is also about reaching impacts for biodiversity. Now there are research that demonstrate that good governance enhance or leads to better conservation outcomes, like this paper that you can see on the screen. And our program of work is articulated around equity, around implementation using human rights-based approaches, and reporting and monitoring. So I'm going to briefly present each area. Next. So first, when we talk about equity in conservation, we refer to these three dimensions that you see on this triangle: the recognition, procedure, and distribution. And these dimensions need to be supported by social, political, and economic conditions so that they can be fully achieved. Next. The first dimension, recognition, this is about recognizing that there are different entities that can play a role in conserving biodiversity with different governance systems, but also knowledge systems. And they can be combined, they should be taken equally as contributing to biodiversity conservation and well-being. And that form part of all of them are contributing to area-based conservation. The next second dimension is procedure. This is about how governance mechanisms are inclusive and ensure that decision-making is done in a good way. So we have principles of good governance. We have, for example, that's where we have the IUCN Green Standard that check on these aspects. And next. And the third is about distribution. It looks at how the benefits, but also the burdens are distributed among duty bearers, stakeholders, and rights holders. This is also where past wrongdoings are addressed and rights restored. Next. So I will now talk about the implementation of these Target 3 using human rights-based approaches. So there are two global resources that can support this. The first is a guidance design for Target 3 implementation. And the second is a roadmap with very clear action areas on how to do this. And both documents were produced in collaboration with different actors, including indigenous peoples and local community organizations. Next. But for what do we mean by a human rights-based approach in protected and conserved areas? It is a two-way relationship between the so-called duty bearers, for example, a protected area agency, and rights holders, for example, indigenous fishing community. So rights holders fully and meaningfully participate in decision-making, and they are enabled to do it, whereas duty bearers are held accountable for decisions that are taken and for respecting and fulfilling rights. Next. So the roadmap for implementing these Target 3 with human rights-based approach is the result of an international workshop that was convened by several organizations, including IUCN, the ICCA Consortium, and the International Indigenous Forum for Biodiversity. It lays out 11 key action areas where, for example, we as IUCN contribute within our mandate. And these are the number 2, which is about developing guidance to address them. Number 4, which is building and sharing capacity. Number 8, which is engaging with the CBD and state parties. And 11, improving redress and grievance mechanism. So given the time, I think we will not go into this detail, but jump to slide 26. Voila, which is about reporting and monitoring on protected and conserved areas. So this is really important to provide an overview, but also an understanding of protected and conserved area systems around the world. It's of course a voluntary undertaking, especially for indigenous territories of life, and it implies quantitative and qualitative data. Next. So the data that is reported on, for example, the Protected Planet website can be used to estimate the total area on Earth that is under some form of protection, where they are, what categories of management they are, what governance types they are. But other platforms, such as the indigenous navigators, allow for communities to report and monitor the level of recognition and implementation of their rights. So for now, we can say that only a fraction of things happening in the world is actually reported. So we have a little data, and the focus now, or the emphasis, is really to support self-reporting and monitoring on indigenous peoples and local communities territories by themselves. So like the Indigenous Navigator Initiative. And I think with this, I can just say that this is where the governance self-assessment are also crucial to provide and to contribute to these data sets as qualitative data. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Cécile. This is a really good kind of really setting the scene for our following presentations that then will look and present different approaches and tools to assess and to improve equity and justice in conservation practices. Regarding the Q&A, I started there the first point there, just to remind that send your questions there, and then we will take up the questions after the presentations. And there's also a possibility for you to vote or to like the questions so that we can take up the ones that are most liked, especially, and other questions too. But now we will go to the next presentation. Moses Adjei from Wageningen University, Netherlands. He's a postdoctoral fellow at the Environmental Policy Group of the university. Moses holds a PhD in sociology and social policy. Currently, he works in 2 EU-funded projects, Permaco, which focuses on ways to improve performance of marine governance, and Blue4All, which focuses on developing social and governance tools for effective and efficient marine protected areas management. This research focuses on marine coastal governance, small-scale fisheries, coastal livelihoods, and well-being, as well as inclusive conservation. So Moses, floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you very much, Riku, for the introduction. Yes, so my name is Moses Adjei, and today I'm going to present an overview of the 2 implementation with regards to the application of SAGE, which is referred to as site level assessment of governance and equity. So when we talk about SAGE, it's a tool or methodology for assessing the governance and equity of protected areas, including MPAs, which is marine protected areas, and it draws from the IUCN principles of good governance of protected areas. And I think you've seen already the principles or the 3 key dimensions of equity. So I won't go deeper into that. So it's based on the procedural, the recognition, and distribution equity. But there's also an aspect of governance, which is more about who has the authority to decide objectives and strategies, how decisions are made, how the actors influence these decisions, and how those with authority and responsibility are held to account. So it combines these two aspects of governance and equity to assess in the assessment of SAGE. Please, can you go to the next one? Yes, so this is the framework for the assessment of equity and governance. That is the SAGE principle, the 10 SAGE principles. And as I said, if you look at it, you'll see that 8 out of the 10 indicators are based on the dimensions of equity. And then there are other general governance principles. So in all, we have 10 SAGE principles or indicators to assess these issues of governance and equity. Can you go to the next? Yes, so generally the purpose of SAGE is to enable site-level actors to assess and improve governance and equity of their conservation work in order to improve both social and conservation outcomes. And it could also serve as a monitoring source of information for monitoring for external actors and through their periodic assessment of these protected areas. So these are the two core objectives or purpose of the SAGE tool. And it involves 3 key steps. The first one is the preparatory stage, where there is a need to introduce the tool to the different stakeholders to really understand what the SAGE and the different indicators are about. And then a sort of site profiling and consent and also assessment plan. And the main part of the activity is the assessment stage, which involves 2 key things. One is a survey or a questionnaire where stakeholders or the different stakeholders are given a set of questions based on the 10 principles to complete. And then based on the results of the survey, there is a synthesis workshop where the different results are discussed to understand and also for actions or priorities to be determined in terms of the action phase. So the third part is the action where different actions may be prioritized, and then the ways to implement these actions are also discussed. So we call it the impact or the impact booster stage, which support actors to implement and monitor their actions for more effective and equitable governance. So these are the 3 key stages of SAGE. And in our case, with regard to the Blue4All implementation, as you can see, we went through the different stages, but it is not yet complete. So we started with the introduction of the tool to key contact person within the MPA that we used. And then it was also about seeking consent and also stakeholder mapping, where we try to list the key actors to be considered for this assessment. Then we went through a series of surveys and interviews to be able to understand the different aspects of the tool. So we had a first round of survey, and when we realized that it was not complete, we had a second round to be able to have a more complete assessment. And then based on that, we analyzed the data, and it was good because we also had some interviews. So based on the analysis, we tried to understand the different levels or the different results that we got. So the next one is the reporting and communication and action, where we have sent the result to the different, the key stakeholders. And then what is outstanding is the interactive workshop, where we would have to discuss the results to really determine or plan actions or decide on prioritize different ways to address the challenges. And this is where we are now currently. We haven't completed the whole process yet, but this is basically the same. So as you can see, the SAGE tool itself has different steps, but then in the real world, you see that things are a bit complicated than as indicated by the two implementers or the two designers. Yeah, can we go to the next? So this is how the results would look like after the first round of the survey. So you can see that based on the different principles, you can have different results. And here we have tried to look at the different scores by principles and actors. And you can see that we have actors such as fishermen, tourist operators, MP officials, NGOs, and academics. And we included the academics because these were people who had worked within the MPAs for a number of years, and they had a lot of interest in the area. So it was good that we also saw their views as well to be able to understand their perspective in terms of these indicators. So based on that, you can see that some of the indicators have higher consensus in terms of from the stakeholders in terms of issues with regards to respect for actors, stakeholders' participation in decision-making, negative impact mitigation. You can see that they are almost closer to each other in terms of the bars. But then when you go to questions with regards to dispute resolution, fair law enforcement, and equitable benefit sharing, you can see that there are low consensus. So what this tool helps you to know is that maybe there are areas where actors or stakeholders may have consensus in terms of the performance of the different indicators, but there are others that there may be low consensus. And then in the discussion, we try to understand why this low consensus, especially to be able to really understand ways to really improve the performance in terms of the equity and governance dimensions. So this is where this is really to serve as a prompt during the workshop for stakeholders to really discuss in detail during the synthesis workshop. Please, can you go to the next? So this one also gives you the score by principle. So this one gives you a more summarized version of the one we had. So this one, you look at the different governance and equity principles, and then you realize that some have higher scores, and then others have lower scores. So then during the synthesis workshop, it's also to discuss how do we push each of the scores up to be able to achieve a more equitable and improved governance system. So you can see that in this case, we have negative impact mitigation, transparency as having more higher scores, and then lower some issues like dispute resolution and participation in decision-making as having lower scores. So during the workshop, the synthesis workshop, this is where then you discuss what are the reasons for these low scores and how do we improve them. So this is just to give you that summary picture, and then during the workshop, you'll be able to discuss some of these things. Yeah. And the goal is to really push things up. Yeah. So as I said earlier, our process is not that very complete. We went through some of the stages, but you can see that we are currently at the, we've done the assessment, but the workshop hasn't happened. So we are still at the assessment stage. And, but then there were useful lessons that we learned through the process, and that I would also like to share with you all. Yeah, so the first point is, yes, please go, yeah. So the first point is that the role of local facilitators or contact persons is very essential. We realized that, for instance, where we did it, I had no prior contacts. So it was very difficult to really build that rapport with the local stakeholders. And that was one of the biggest challenges we had. So getting a local facilitator or somebody who really understands the context to really lead you to the different actors for you to explain what a tool is about is very critical. And it also helps you to verify the indicators to assess the governance principles. And in terms of language adaptation, it's not just about understanding the language of the people, but also in terms of the concepts, the key concepts of the tool for the stakeholders to really understand what you mean in your questionnaire, for instance. And also prioritizing questions. You also realize that not all the questions may fit within the local context. So really aligning things to align with the stakeholders and their needs and interests, because some of the questions may not be in their interest or not be relevant to them, then you don't include them. And the good thing about SAGE is that it's a bit flexible, that you don't have to put everything in the assessment, but you could adjust things to fit the local context. And then also, as I indicated, SAGE really requires intense stakeholder interactions. And the earlier, the better, because it's also very important that you build that kind of trust with the stakeholders, and also for them to own the tool, because if they don't understand the tool and they don't own it, or they see it as something just for researchers to take information and do their own analysis, then it will be difficult to really do the assessment with them in a more detailed manner. So that is also one of the things to take note. Another thing is that while the indicator is very comprehensive, some of the things, as I indicated, some of the questions may not be reflective of the local context. In our case, for instance, some of the stakeholders highlighted that questions such as rights may rather create problems, because issues of rights in the local context may create the impression that, for instance, there are certain rights due to them which is not being maybe given to them in terms of maybe access to MPAs. And if it creates that impression, which might not necessarily be the case, then it could create further confusion among the stakeholders. So this is very important also for anyone who may want to use this tool in the analysis, to ensure that stakeholders really understand and also use relevant questions to fit the context. And finally, one of the things that we also realize is that using the tool and also the graphs to show the different aspects of equity and governance also could create an impression that maybe, for instance, key stakeholders such as MPA managers' performance are being assessed. So these graphs could create that impression and could hinder key stakeholder participation in the process. But what we want to highlight here is that it is not really about the scores or the graphs, but it's about the process, how you go through the process, and also engaging the different stakeholders to get their views in terms of the different aspects of equity and governance, which this is what is more important, and also deciding on ways to improve things within the MPA. This is what is more important in this whole assessment process. So with that, I'll end here. But if you want to know more about the SAGE tool, you can look this link or also send me an email and I'll send you more details on that. Thank you very much.
Moses, was an interesting practical experience of assessment. And let me remind you of the Q&A. Leave there your questions about the presentations or the tools. And now we move on to the next presentation. That's the IUCN's new guidebook on equity and justice, and this will be presented by Nathan Bennett. Nathan is Global Oceans lead scientist at WWF, and in this role, Nathan conducts forward-looking research, provides thought leadership, and manages science talents and projects related to pressing ocean sustainability challenges. Nathan is, by the way, also the chair of People and the Oceans Specialist Group for the IUCN. Prior to joining WWF, he has worked as consultant and researcher and teacher for various non-governmental, academic and governmental organizations in Canada, USA, and Spain. And in his work, he has done research projects in Canada, Mexico, Thailand, and Mediterranean Sea, quite often also with global ocean issues perspectives. Trained as a conservation social scientist, is particularly interested in how insights related to social, cultural, economic, health, and governance considerations can be integrated into and improve environmental decision-making and marine policy. Nathan, please present us the very fresh IUCN Guidebook.
Great, thank you so much. Can I just confirm that you can hear me and also that you can see my slides?
Yes, it's perfect.
Wonderful. Yeah, and I always find it such a strange experience doing these presentations because I don't get to see you while I'm speaking, you all, so I don't get to see your reactions and interact with you. But here we are in this wonderful time that we're in, where we can present globally. So it's good morning, everyone. Good afternoon, good evening, depending where you are. It's really my pleasure to share with you this recently launched guidebook for assessing and improving social equity and marine conservation. And this is something that's been in development for some time. We recently launched it at the IUCN World Conservation Congress. And just a couple of notes on its development. First, this is a guidebook that I really co-developed quite closely with Mark Andrzejczak, who is my co-lead, and I see that Mark is also on the call today listening. So I guess that you couldn't get enough of this process, Mark. So I assure everyone here that Mark could probably do a better job of presenting the guidebook than I can. So apologies for my presence, but here we are again. The other thing that I just want to recognize is that this was a project that had many different organizations involved, support from the IUCN Commission on Environmental, Economic and Social Policy, the WWF Global Science Team, with funding from the Blue Nature Alliance, also in partnership with WCF and Conservation International. And before I go to that slide, the other thing that I just want to recognize is that this was also the work of many individuals. There was a large team on our working group, and those are also co-authors on this guidebook. And in addition to all of those individuals listed here, we also worked to test the tool. The tool was reviewed. We got feedback in various forms and in various ways. And we really appreciate all of those that have contributed to the development of this guidebook. Now, what I'm going to present to you today is just a kind of quick walkthrough of the guidebook. I'll kind of race through some of the front end of this because it's already been covered by some of the other speakers, talking about why equity, talking a little bit about the process of developing the guidebook, and talking about what equity is. And then I'm going to jump into the 3 approaches that we developed as part of this guidebook. And I'll talk through those 3 approaches, when you might use each of the different ones, talk about some of the key considerations that we learned about how and when they're applied, and then jump into the importance of learning and improving, and end with just an open invitation for anybody that wants to use, apply, or build on this guidebook going ahead. But before I proceed, I just want to pay homage to the origin of this project. So this project really emerged out of a concern for some of the negative impacts that were arising in the context of marine conservation. And that really came to the fore during a global think tank on the human dimensions of large-scale marine protected areas that we hosted in Hawaii in 2016. There was a very challenging conversation that emerged in plenary during that global think tank. And rather than avoiding that conversation, we decided that we were going to address it head on. And so from the think tank on the human dimensions of large-scale marine conservation, we then hosted a separate meeting and process to develop what at the time was a draft code of conduct for marine conservation that we published. Subsequently, the Blue Nature Alliance decided to bring that code of conduct on board into their own work as a global funder of marine conservation. And then together we developed this initial kind of thought piece around advancing social equity in and through marine conservation, which was published at a really fortuitous time because it emerged right around the time that the Global Biodiversity Framework was being developed, and then emerged with language around equitable governance. And of course, that does build on the language around equitable management that was contained within the HE targets. So out of all of that process, after we developed some of this initial thinking and guidance, we decided that we wanted to go a little bit deeper and provide something more practical for practitioners and managers who are working on the ground. And so we essentially started with this central question for the project, which is how can we evaluate progress towards equitable marine conservations in ways that lead to meaningful action and improvement on the ground. And to answer that question, we decided that we were going to develop a guidebook that was freely accessible and available to any teams or organizations hoping to assess social equity in their marine conservation initiatives. And there we wanted to focus on various types of marine conservation initiatives: marine protected areas, OECMs, locally managed marine areas, and others. And you know, always in the back of our mind was this idea that however we were developing this guidance, it was all about working towards positive change. It was less about studying it and more about improving it on the ground and in the places where marine conservation is being done. So, you know, just to step back, you know, really briefly as to why do we want to assess equity in marine conservation or in conservation more broadly. You know, there's 3 big picture reasons, and I think some of the other speakers have already touched quite well on the middle one, which is, you know, obviously that it's this is something that's being integrated into legal mandates related to human rights, and also into conservation policy at a global level. And so the clear example, of course, is the Global Biodiversity Framework, which pays attention to human rights, benefit sharing, participation, and really moves us beyond just this idea of doing no harm towards doing more good. The other 2 reasons, though, that I just want to remind us of is first that you know, this is really a moral obligation for the conservation community to address some of the past negative consequences that have arisen in the context of conservation, and to instead you know, really focus on working alongside and bringing benefit to the communities that are living in the area where conservation is being done. And then of course, there is a very practical reason as well why we should be assessing and improving equity, and that is that the research clearly shows, and we know from a history of places where conservation is being done, that when processes are equitable and when outcomes are more equitable, that leads to greater legitimacy, that leads to stronger support, and that leads to better ecological outcomes for conservation. And so that's really important for us to take that into account as well. And so all of that to say, we really do need to focus on assessing and taking action to improve social equity within marine conservation. And here I'll emphasize both governance and management. Now, the process through which we developed this guidebook happened over the last couple of years. So the first thing that we did is that we dug in really deep and reviewed past equity assessments, approaches, indicators, and measures. And we published a paper earlier this year where with some of the review of indicators, we came up with over 500 indicators that kind of subsequently fed into this working group process. As during the working group process, we brought together that global group of experts that I mentioned earlier. So these are experts in marine conservation, as well as in the social dimensions of marine conservation. And we came up with an initial idea for how we would approach the development of the methods in the guidebook. We then took that out to funders, MPA managers, and other conservation practitioners for a discussion during a virtual workshop. And during that workshop, what we learned is that our initial proposal, while valid, didn't meet the broad array of different needs and contexts that managers face. And so that we needed to go back to the drawing book. And notably, what we ended up doing is developing 3 distinct tools or options for assessing equity in order to meet managers and communities in different places. So then we developed those 3 approaches. Subsequently, we tested them and gathered feedback on them through presenting it at global conferences and elsewhere. And then we developed the guidebook and we just launched that. So our guidebook, we ground in this broad definition of equity, which is fairness and justice with respect to the way that people are recognized, treated, or impacted by conservation initiatives. And unlike some of the tools that were just presented, the SAGE tool and some of the other ones, we do move a little bit beyond the 3 dimensions of procedural, recognitional, and distributional. All 3 of those are, of course, absolutely important within this context, and I won't define each of those. But I want to just add a little bit of context as to why we added management, environmental, and really emphasize contextual and structural equity within our guidebook. So first, on management, this was added partially due to feedback from practitioners and also from an Indigenous colleague of mine that around this idea that when we're thinking about governance, we may not get down to the ground in terms of thinking about the capacity, the funding, the agency, and the authority of local people to actually take action themselves on the ground to manage an initiative. And so we wanted to really bring that forward within this framework. And interesting enough, Adjei had equitable management, and then it moved to equitable governance. So we added management in there. A second thing that we wanted to really pay attention to was environment. And this is important because it's important that the types of areas, species, ecosystems, and services, et cetera, being protected matter to local people, and also that the way that they're being managed actually brings benefit to them. Because there's certainly some places where I've worked where even though there is a marine conservation initiative and local people well-being might be improved, for example, through livelihood benefits associated with tourism, food security associated with greater income from tourism, the environment itself is actually in decline. And so we wanted to really call that out. And then, of course, as in the SAGE tool, contextual and structural really deals with those enablers or barriers to equity at the site level that can exist within the broader context. Now, similar to the SAGE tool, you know, the way that we kind of developed this tool in this guidebook, or the series of tools, is that we started with a central objective. We broke that out into some of the dimensions of equity. And here I only just have the three elements of recognitional, procedural, and distributional. From there, we broke that out into sub-attributes related to the central dimensions. And then we developed indicators, which were incorporated into survey instruments and tools for the different approaches. And I'm not going to go through all of the sub-elements here for time, but and again, there's also the three other elements that we included within our broader framework. But the important thing here is not that every single one of these attributes or indicators is important within all contexts. We're providing a set of attributes and indicators that we encourage people to adapt and to use in their own way within their own context. And that, you know, each of the tools uses a kind of a scoring rubric for each of the indicators to understand how well we're doing on equity for each of the individual attributes. And then those can be aggregated for dimensions and overall equity. Another thing that we emphasize within this guidebook, I mean, the real focus of this guidebook is on the second and the third element here, which is designing the equity assessment and also carrying out the equity assessment. But similar to other tools, you know, here we emphasize that this is part of an ongoing process, or what we call a learning journey that starts with committing to addressing equity, and that carries through after the assessments into reflecting and deliberating on those results and deciding on a course of action, and then actually moving forward into taking action. Because here, the ultimate goal of this assessment is to produce some sort of meaningful and change and improvements in terms of equity. So now I'm going to quickly present the three approaches for assessing equity. So based on the feedback from the managers and practitioners and others, we came up with three different assessment approaches. So the first one is a rapid equity assessment, which is intended to provide really quick insights into key equity issues based on reflections from a small group of managers. The second broad approach is a stakeholders and rights holders equity assessment. And this is a tool that's survey-based. It takes a little bit of additional time. And the focus here is increasing awareness of equity through engagement of stakeholders and rights holders. And then the third tool is a much more in-depth approach, which is co-produced and customizable. And this is intended to provide in-depth insights into equity based on you know, an ongoing and participatory approach that's co-designed with stakeholders and rights holders. And that's just a pretty slide where we bring the elements together with the three approaches. I'll just provide a little bit more context to each of the three equity assessment approaches. So as I said, the rapid equity assessment, this is an approach that's intended to be done with managers or key experts who are deeply engaged with the Marine Conservation Initiative. And here, this happens relatively rapidly through a survey with key informants, and it could require as little as a couple of days. You know, you want to have an introductory meeting with all participants, and you want to do one-on-one survey with each participant, bring those together, have some sort of debrief and follow-up discussion with all of those participants. And this is a sort of approach that you might want to use if there's limited local capacity or funding for those assessments. But of course, you know, as with all approaches, it has some limitations, and that is that it may be biased by those that are completing the assessment, and it might not address all of the concerns from the perspective of all stakeholders and rights holders. This second approach, the stakeholder and rights holders equity assessment, is much more engaged. This is something that you would apply with managers, but also with a broader group of stakeholders and rights holders in order to understand those diverse perspectives on equity within the Marine Conservation Initiative. So we've developed a survey tool here that we've provided within the guidebook. And this one is going to take, substantially more time. You're going to want to do some sort of an introductory meeting with managers. You want to move into a survey of all of those different stakeholders and rights holders groups that you've identified through an initial stakeholder mapping exercise. And then you're going to want to bring that back into some sort of debrief and follow-up meeting where you deliberate on courses of action. This approach is something that managers or other practitioners associated with a marine conservation initiative might want to employ if they want to really understand how different stakeholders and rights holders are experiencing those equity issues, and if you want to disaggregate based on those groups, such as was presented by Moses in the previous presentation. And a limitation here is that it's still based on a limited number of perspectives. The last one is more in-depth, and this one could take as much as several months to go through, where you're engaged in an ongoing process of co-developing the equity assessment with stakeholders and rights holders. And this one happens through a series of meetings, and all of the stages in the process, which we lay out here in the guidebook, are something that you would co-develop with the actors in the Marine Conservation Initiative. I'll just go to two last slides here. First, just to emphasize that what we provide through the guidebook is a set of tools rather than an individual approach, and the back end of the guidebook provides all of those tools laid out and instructions for them and specific instruments that might be applied. But we're offering those as tools that should be adapted. The attributes, the indicators, all of the rest of it in order to meet individual needs at the site level. The guidebook also just walks through a broad number of considerations for applying the social equity assessments across all of the stages for choosing the approach, preparing, carrying out, and then moving from assessment to action. And I don't have time to go through those here. But ultimately, what I really want to emphasize again is that it's the back end of this process that matters even more than the assessments. It's the communication of the results, it's the deliberation on the results, and the committing to action in order to make improvements in the place. So with that, I just want to leave you with an open invitation. The guidebook is freely available online at the link that I provided in the chat earlier. We encourage you to take up the guidebook, to engage with it, to adapt it, and to carry out assessments in whatever places that you work. And we do think that some of the thinking that's provided in here is adaptable to other types of marine conservation, to fisheries, as well as to terrestrial conservation initiatives. So with that, I'll leave it there. The QR code does provide a link to the same site, and please do feel free to reach out to Mark Andrzejczuk at Reconnect Consulting or myself if you have any additional questions about this.
Thanks a lot, Nathan. Now we will move on to the final presentation. That is my colleague Aino Rekola will present the Blue4All tool. Aino is a researcher working at the Finnish Environment Institute at the Societal Change Unit. Her research has explored spatial planning, also with a focus on questions of justice. Aino also has experience in nature conservation administration, having previously worked at the Ministry of the Environment of Finland, where she developed international cooperation in nature conservation. Aino, go ahead.
Thank you, Riku, and hello everyone, and thank you for the opportunity to present our work on the justice and the deliberation assessment tool for marine conservation. And as Riku said, we have developed this tool within the Blue4All project together with Riku. And our goal when we prepared this tool was to support practitioners and decision makers in better understanding and addressing justice issues in in marine conservation, especially in a Northern European context. So in this sense, it's like a practical interpretation of a justice tool to a specific context. And I want to highlight that our approach is very practical, also in the sense that we have co-designed this tool with the regional experts and practitioners to ensure that it's applicable. And we get very valuable feedback from them in different phases. But however, we haven't yet tested our tool in a real-world case in a way that Moses has tested the SAGE tool. But I will now present results of the co-design process. So today I will tell you about the background and purpose of our tool, the context for which we developed it, and the framework, and finally show you the tool itself. So now you can put the next slide, Francisca. Thank you. Okay, one starting point for our work was recognition that conservation practice is always, to some extent, political. And to us, this means that conservation decisions always involve choices related to what to protect and how to protect it, and whose voices are heard in the process. And this means also that there are always beneficiaries and those who bear or may bear the costs. And these issues, they are sensitive issues. And these can easily be politicized and misunderstood. And this is one reason behind starting to develop this tool. So our intention was not to make conservation more political, but rather to make the social dimensions of conservation more visible and understandable. And this way support fair and transparent decision making. In recent years, as Nathan already referred, and other presenters, justice in nature conservation has gained increasing attention across different levels of governance, and also scientific interest in justice in marine conservation has also grown significantly. But there are also practical demands for these kinds of tools. And in the Blue4All project, we first engaged with the Finnish experts working on the national roadmap for the Marine Protected Area Network. And they highlighted that there's a lack of these kind of practical tools which they could use to address sociocultural aspects in marine conservation governance here in the Northern European context. And in response, we co-developed this tool to support a deeper understanding of different kind of sociocultural dimensions and their root causes, and at the same time help them to reflect the realities of these kind of issues. But we want to highlight that our tool is not a certification of justice. It's designed to be a framework for reflection and dialogue. So in this sense, it's quite different from, for example, the SAGE tool. So then finally, how this tool is designed to be used. Well, we discussed quite a lot with the practitioners and authorities on how they could integrate justice considerations into existing planning and management processes without adding an extra layer of work. And so we ended up in developing a tool which is designed for authorities, practitioners, and consultants, which in a way it's something that enriches and synthesizes those currently made sociocultural analyses, which the practitioners make at the moment already, this shouldn't be in a way considered as an added burden to a conservation process. Next slide, please. Just a few words about the context for which we prepared this. As already referred to in previous presentations, the issues of justice look different from different contexts. And what makes Northern Europe specific is that nature conservation governance is highly institutionalized. And the EU, in this context, the EU provides a structured and legally binding framework for nature conservation, and there are specific regulations such as Habitats Directive and new restoration law, which set clear requirements for protecting species and habitats in member states. And while these goals, they define the overarching goals, then the member states, they are responsible for practical implementation and management of conservation. And in addition to nation states, there are also different kind of intergovernmental organizations which facilitate conservation activities, such as in the Baltic Sea, there's Helsinki Commission, which facilitates cooperation in marine environmental protection activities, including nature conservation activities. And despite these highly structured nature conservation governance systems, the implementation of different objectives and regulations has faced significant challenges, partly because of legitimacy and other social issues. To which Nathan made a reference to. So in this context, where at least some level of participation of stakeholders is already mainstream, the issues of justice are often about which groups gain access to influence and whose expertise dominates the process. And this kind of bureaucratic nature of our conservation systems, they can also unintentionally reduce accessibility and make engagement demanding for some stakeholders. And finally, there are also some binding frameworks for the protection of fundamental rights of all citizens, which demand that the public officials have to take justice issues seriously also in nature conservation processes. For example, in Finland, there's a Non-Discrimination Act which requires that public authorities have to assess and ensure equity in all their activities. So our tool is designed for this kind of established system to help practitioners reflect on justice within these quite routine procedures. We have also used as a general framework this three-dimensional framework of justice, which have been referred to several times here already, and I won't go into details now, just to say that these three dimensions, they make the conceptual backbone of our tool. In the process of co-designing the tool, we discussed and developed how these three dimensions can be operationalized in practice. Next slide, please. So our tool is built around the three justice dimensions, and we have then operationalized or translated these into 16 practical subtopics, and we used some previously published justice tools as a resource, SAGE tool, and also one developed for the Finnish context for climate policy. But the final list has been co-developed with the Finnish MPA experts. And each of these 16 subtopics, they address one key aspect of justice in marine conservation in this Northern European context. And for each, in the tool itself, we have developed for each subtopic one guiding question and then several supporting questions, which facilitate the practitioners who use the tool to plan the conservation decisions and engaging stakeholders and assessing their final decisions. And the next slide, please. And beyond thematic guidance, our tool provides also a framework for the process of implementing justice deliberation and assessment during the conservation process. And here we have followed the process developed by Nathan and modified it together with the practitioners to ensure that it's applicable in this specific context. And in the process, the core principle is participation, which means that the stakeholders need to be engaged meaningfully to achieve better outcomes. And the 5 planning phases, which are you can see here in blue, and these should be aligned with the existing stakeholder engagement activities and strategies. And in this Northern European context, where the formal processes and legal frameworks are already strong, the key challenges, as I told, are often about accessibility and inclusiveness. And we even tend to see these kind of user suspects, which are professional organizations and well-networked actors who have learned how to participate in the conservation processes. And then again, some smaller groups or individuals, they might struggle to engage effectively, partly because the system is a bit complex and often bureaucratic. And then it is also important to ensure that the outcomes of the assessment are actually used in planning and management. So the concluding phases, which are drawing conclusions, taking action, and monitoring, which are in green here, they're equally critical to ensure that the insights lead to real improvements. And we want to highlight that this our tool is not for scoring or judgment, but it can be used for facilitating understanding of the factors which influence justice and to highlight strengths to which build on and gaps which should be addressed. Next slide, please. So here's the example of the tool itself, and it's an equality sub-theme. Could you please click? Let me the first click, like there's animations. So this is equality sub-theme. Next. And in under each sub-theme, there's one main question. And in this sub-theme, the question guides the think through whether all people are in equal position regarding the impacts of conservation decisions and whether there's any risk of discriminatory effects. Next. And then there are several supporting questions which help to understand what equality can mean in practice. So it helps to understand whether age, gender, health are affecting positions of people in relation to conservation processes and decisions, or wealth, skills, and education, and these kind of aspects which should be taken into account during the process. And thirdly, next please. There are several illustrative response options which are designed to make it easier to identify whether there are still knowledge gaps and to plan additional participatory or research activities if those are needed. So this structure encourages users to think critically about why certain groups might be affected differently and how this knowledge could guide better decisions. Next, please. So to summarize, our tool is tailored for the Northern European context. It's very practical and it's designed to fit established marine conservation frameworks and governance cultures. It fosters active and structured dialogue on justice rather than just judgment. And it supports reflection and shared understanding among stakeholders of different aspects and dimensions of justice. And finally, it does require some investment in participation, in time, facilitation, and skills. But we want to highlight that this investment is what ensures meaningful and usable result. We received some comments during the process that using this tool requires skills that not all practitioners maybe don't have. So, for example, social scientific understanding of facilitation expertise could be out of comfort zone of some conservation biologists, but on the other hand, many planners have these kind of skills. So there could be also an opportunity for learning from colleagues. So that's true that this requires some investments, but we also highlight that there's a need for interdisciplinary collaboration in all conservation management. So that's my presentation. Thank you very much. I'm looking forward to discussion.
Thank you, Aino. Now we have been presented three different approaches. Moses presented the SAGE tool, which it's one structured process, one tool. And then Nathan presented the IUCN Guidebook that presents sort of a framework for equity and justice, and then includes three different types of tools to implement that. And then Aino presented Blue4All tool that is mainly designed for established conservation settings, and also with the idea to be integrated into conservation process. And well, all of the tools, they are assessing equity and justice, but they also present or include the idea quite strongly that it should also lead to improvement of equity. And then to some questions to the presenters. The one most voted is actually a set of questions, and I think it's partly maybe partly to Nathan, but I think that all of you can comment. There's a kind of start with the notion that there are a lot of assessments are ongoing, and at local level there may be even some frustration with lots of assessments. But the other question is that the guidebook that maybe the main question here is that how do we get the community involved in the assessments, and can the assessment be actually community led, and that may be the main question then. Maybe you can.
Yeah, great. No, thank you so much for this question, and I think you've hit the nail on the head. And this is exactly what we heard from the managers and practitioners. Like they said, we have a lot on our plate. We have lots of assessments that we're supposed to be doing. There's a lot of actions that we're supposed to be taking. We often have limited budgets on the ground to do this sort of work. And originally we were kind of toying with the idea of doing a much more participatory process of developing the assessments as being the thing that we presented in the guidebook. And what we heard is actually, no, we need various options. We need options for when managers don't have a lot of time and when they have to do a whole lot of other assessments and they don't have a lot of budget, but they're still quite committed to this idea of equity. And so just something for them to be able to do a quick reflection is one approach. And then in other places where there is strong community interest and engagement and buy-in, and there is adequate capacity and time and resources, then you might step into the broader stakeholder engagement where you're assessing those, and then even further in other cases. There's no way that you're going to do an equity assessment without real and significant community buy-in to the process, and where the community has co-developed and improved of those indicators and said, these are the things that we agree with in terms of what equity means to us. And so, that's why we provided the different options for people so that they can choose which one is going to be the most appropriate for them. And again, engaging with the community takes time, it takes energy, it takes funding often, and sometimes the marine protected area might be even in a place where that relationship hasn't been great historically, and so I think it might be right to start with just a self-assessment, just to start the process for managers of thinking and then move more into community engagement. In other places, it might be best to start with the community engagement. And just to the last element of the question, and then I'll pass it on. Yes, absolutely, equity assessments can be community-led, they can be NGO-led, they can be practitioner-led, they can be encouraged by funders. There's various ways that we encourage the tool to be used and by various actors. But importantly, like in Ainu's and Moses's presentation, the intention here is something practical, something for reflection by the various actors that are involved in the process. And we really encourage that there is no one-size-fits-all approach. And so in some cases it might be better to use SAGE, in other places it might be better to use the Blue4All tool.
Thanks. Moses, you also worked in a community. So do you have some reflections on these questions about the role of community in the assessment?
Yeah, thank you. I think Nathan has said a lot, and just to add to that, I think that also issues of equity and justice are quite political in nature, and also it could also create tensions in a way. So at least from my experience, we also realize that some of the questions, for instance, if you don't get a buy-in from the local groups or the stakeholders, then especially if they see it as something that is going to create more tensions than to address their issues, then getting the buy-in will also be a challenge. So I think from my experience, yeah, that was one of the challenges we had with the tool, because it got to a point that some of the stakeholders felt that the tool perhaps is not really relevant for their case, because it is maybe not, issues of equity are not really a key challenge in their context at the moment or something like that. So I think really getting to know that this is indeed an issue within the context that you want to address will make it more easier for them to be involved than maybe just picking one area that you think are quite interesting for you to do a certain assessment and then just implementing a tool there. It might be very difficult. So the best is to really get a group of stakeholders who have identified certain kinds of challenges relating to equity and participation, for instance, and then trying to get their buy-in with a particular tool that you identify as useful, and then trying to get them engaged in this process. If you go with that bottom-up approach, then it is easier to really get them involved. Otherwise, it will be something that will be more or less like extracting information, as one of our participants just said. Yeah. Thank you.
And do you have a comment on this community aspect, even though we haven't tested it in any community? But
yes, maybe I can comment this from the Northern European context. I think that at least in this context, there there are these are responsibilities of the authorities, and this is something where they have to allocate resources for, and which they also need to learn to do. There are challenges also in Europe in implementing nature conservation objectives, and these are often related to social aspects such as legitimacy. So I think that this kind of tools could help in achieving nature conservation objectives, and that's why I would vote for allocating resources for using this. But then again, when there are communities who are interested in joining these, and these cannot be done without communities and active communities, so of course it's important to engage them and involve them.
Thanks. And then there's a question from Hamish, quite practical ones about dealing with communities. Is that, do you have any difficulty navigating in-country ethical approvals processes for undertaking these surveys?
I mean, I can respond to that one. You know, obviously, you know, all research that's being done in various places around the world should follow whatever the due process is in that place. And every country is completely different in terms of, you know, even whether there's any sort of ethical requirements for doing human dimensions research. Some countries don't have those requirements in place. Regardless, I think you know, it behooves us as we're doing this type of research and we're thinking about these types of questions to follow good process, and that includes, you know, asking for permission, free, prior, and informed consent in the survey process, ensuring that to the extent possible that you know, surveys in particular are done in such a way that it maintains anonymity and confidentiality for participants if they so desire, because they may or may not desire that, but also recognizing that if we're doing these processes as participatory processes, then actually the extent to which people can be anonymous or confidential in their responses is limited by the fact that they're engaging in a group setting. And so, yeah, there's all sorts of different considerations there, and in some cases, if we're not treating it as research, if we're treating it as instead as process, then the permissions that we're seeking are slightly different than if we're treating it as research, right? So ethical research considerations are one thing, but if we're just treating it as part of an internal planning and management process, then the ethical considerations change slightly because it's no longer research, it's instead a participatory process.
Thanks. Then there's a question directed to Moses about the use of SAGE tool. Did you use a centralized or decentralized approach as suggested in the SAGE? And then how did you manage the 10 principles?
Yeah, thank you very much. So I also responded to that in the responses, but just to repeat, so we initially planned a more decentralized, a more bottom-up approach where we wanted to have this stakeholder workshop and then try to explain things right from the start. But then we realized that we had challenges with that. So what we did was, through the Blue4All project, we also have people that we call contact people or contact persons. So we try to use these contacts that we had within the MPA to share the survey questions to the different stakeholder groups who, after completing the survey, also sent back the raw data to us to analyze. So this is the approach that we use. So if you look at Nathan's categories, we, if you look at SAGE, it is quite in the step 2 where you have to do this, how do you call it, stakeholder or right holders assessment. But then from the approach that we use, it is more of the rapid maybe assessment in this case. So I think that was it. And in terms of the principles, yes, we managed to take the 10 SAGE principles, but we also realized that some of the questions did not really fit the context. So it was not all the questions or the indicators under each of the principles that were taken for the assessment. So for instance, issues of access, rights were not included in the whole in the exercise. Yeah.
Thanks. And then to the last question, depends on how long answers you will have, but it's about the communication of the outcomes of equity review, about the good methods to communicate with communities of these results. And actually, I could say that this is in our co-production process. This was also a concern raised by a conservation practitioner that when you have the assessment results and then you publish them, that they could be sort of politicized against conservation also. And then our answer there is kind of to trust the process, that the assessment and communication of the assessment results is not the end of the process. It's actually start of the deliberation on resources. But do you have some reflections on methodologies to communicate with communities about the results of the equity review?
I mean, I could just quickly jump in and say, you know, I base my thinking around this on Elinor Ostrom's idea that all environmental policies should be viewed as experiments, and therefore we must have humility. And you know, so to the points that some of the others have made, you know, this is not about certification. This is not about judgment. This is not about naming and shaming. This is instead about, you know, humility and engaging in a process of ongoing learning and improvement. You know, for some reason we don't seem to have the same problem when we say a marine protected area has not led to more fish, right? And yet that is as much of a problem that we need to address if we're going to improve marine conservation, right? As equity is. So I think just engaging really in a way that's about process and humility and learning and improvement is the way to engage in the process and also to bring results back.
Excellent. I think that we are coming to the end of our webinar. Thanks for the presentations and thanks for good questions. As you know, this event was recorded and we will share the recording on our websites afterwards. So these presentations will be available, and we will also share information. We have, you know, all of these tools are available online, our draft also. So we will ensure that you will have the links to those. So thanks to all the presenters and the participants.
Thank you so much, Riku. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone. This has been great.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.